Nancy?
Yeah, let's go.
Right. So welcome to our webinar on how to support a grieving child. I'm Genevieve Sines. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapy associate. No, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm no longer an associate. And I've been working at Hospice Austin as a bereavement counselor for about 4 years now.
And I'm Nancy McCraney. I'm the Director of Volunteer and Bereavement Services here at Hospice Austin. And I am in my 21st year. I can't believe it. And I started as a chaplain and then got, moved into the world of walking alongside people who were grieving. And it's just really enriched my life. I've also been a part of Camp Braveheart since the very beginning. And so I'm really pleased with what some of your children are experiencing this week. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So just some stuff about this meeting and our communications up front. We are recording this conversation to share it with parents who can't be here. So anything you share, just know you're free to share here, but that it will not stay in this group. It will be shared beyond here. Is that right, Nancy?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, we're asking you to stay muted, but there'll be some times where we can share together and we can use the chat box to share or ask questions. And we'll try to watch that chat box and answer questions as they come in. And if you have a pen and paper nearby, might be nice to get because we're going to give you a lot of information. And just in the spirit of gentleness with yourself, you don't have to take it in right now. That's why we're recording it, so that if you need to, you can come back and get this information again.
Yeah. And we may offer it live again sometime. It just depends on the interest. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get started.
Yeah. And we like to start all our webinars with the moment to just stop and take a deep breath and let all that chatter and noise and responsibilities and busyness just settle. I think especially when we're in the season of our life when we're caring for children, wow, there's hardly ever a moment to just be. And I will tell you right now, there is nothing else you need to do in this moment except be right here. And you're in the right place. No matter how you are today, you're in the right place. You're in good company. If you have other devices on, I invite you to turn them off or turn them away so that you're not distracted. This next hour is for you. And however you're able, I just urge you to soak it in. Take a deep breath if you haven't already, and try to let some of the tension of the day just fall off. Get comfortable in your chair and maybe have your spine upright but not tense. And then either close your eyes or just soften your gaze. Just relax your face and tune inside and just let your breathing be relaxed. Don't try to force it, but just notice your breathing. And then notice any sensation you're feeling in your body right now, what your body is telling you. Are your head and neck really tense? You might want to raise your shoulders and then lower them. Shake your head a little bit. Relax your shoulders, your arms, your hands, your belly. Let your belly just relax and be full. A lot of us, we hold our bellies in, right? Just let it go. Let it be full. Relax your back and your hips, your legs, your feet. Take another breath and just feel your body receiving that gift of oxygen, the oxygen of your breath, and then let your breath go. So filling it and then emptying it. Just relaxing and loosening, signaling to your brain that you're safe right now. Everything's okay. And then as you breathe, just notice if there's any activity or chatter going on in your mind. If you're like me, the answer to that is always yes. It could be thoughts or memories or things you're trying to remember to do or that you already did today, and just maybe observe them without any judgment. There they are. Imagine that they're like clouds in the sky, that they're just floating by, floating through your mind, and there's nothing that you need to do about them except just watch them, pay attention, but then let them go. So the key is not to attach to those thoughts, but just to observe them and let them just be what they are. If emotions arise or physical sensations, just acknowledge them as well and let them be without attaching to them. And then just bring your attention back to your breath and to witnessing this flow of clouds going across the sky of your mind. Just as with the big blue of the sky is always there behind the clouds and behind the storms, notice that there's a part of you that is able to watch your thoughts as they pass by. There's a part of you that is unaffected by the thoughts, the feelings, the physical sensations. And then ask yourself, who's doing the watching? Who is this that's observing my thoughts, my feelings, my sensations? Some call this our true self or our soul. There's a wise teacher named Pema Chodron who says, you are the sky, everything else is just the weather. And so we're able to, when we tune into our breath and into this moment, we're able to tap into this true self, this sky self, the observer of the weather, either our own weather or the weather of the children we care for or somebody else that we love. So at any moment we can deepen our breath, calm our breath, and pay attention. And that sky is always there, welcoming us into a deeper knowing, a more peaceful way of being that connects us to everything we need, to wisdom, to peace, to joy, to kindness. We are the sky. Breathe in that peace. Peace as we breathe into our true selves, and then allow even that thought to just float away. So taking another breath, you might wriggle your fingers and toes. If your eyes are closed, you might open your eyes and join back into this circle of support that we have all created here together tonight, so that we can begin this conversation on how to support children who are grieving.
Thank you, Nancy. That was so nice. So we're going to get into some information now, and I think it's really nice that we started with breath so that you have that place to return to if some of this information is too much or you need a break from it or it doesn't all process. So talking about grieving children and how there are differences between how children grieve and how adults grieve here. 3 of the most common feelings expressed by grieving children. The first is actually, you would think it's just sadness. I mean, a lot of the time we think grief is just sorrow and crying. And it certainly is some of that. But in children especially, sometimes it really expresses more as anxiety or worry. And that's really the more predominant feeling that sometimes can come up for kids. Yeah, anxiety and worry about a lot of different things. It can look a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's worry about you. They're worried about, are you okay as my caregiver? Sometimes they're worried about school. They're worried about monsters, depending on their age, right? But that fear and that worry and that anxiety is pretty predominant feeling in kids who are grieving.
Yeah, it's closer to the surface than normal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then a second is they feel different. And children don't want to feel different. They're learning how to be by being a part of a peer group. And that's why they so often imitate one another in the way they act, and the way they dress, and the way they talk. And so to feel different during these different developmental stages can feel really isolating, can feel really scary, and like something is terribly wrong. Often children don't know anybody else that has lost a parent or a grandparent or sibling or an aunt or uncle. And so they can't imagine that anybody else has ever been in this situation before. And that's actually the power of a camp like Camp Braveheart, because literally every single person there is in the same boat. They've lost somebody that they love. And so that kind of support can be really important for children that are grieving, because then they feel like they're part of the group again. They don't feel so different and alone.
Mm-hmm. So important. And then the last one is guilt. You know, guilt is such a huge part of, in my opinion, all grief. It comes up, it seems to just be tied to loss. There's this question of, what did I do? How could I have changed this? And that seems like kind of a natural response that our bodies almost have to losing something. Where did it go? What can I do? What we're trying to evaluate what we did, and that can feel like guilt. And especially as a caregiver, I don't know, Nancy, if you agree, but especially as a caregiver, I think when our kids feel guilty, it can be very triggering for us to try to, oh boy, they're feeling like it's their fault, and it's it can trigger our guilt, actually.
Right. That we didn't protect them from that. But, you know, I have a friend who's a therapist, and she was working with a young girl whose father had died, and they were doing play therapy with puppets as a way to tap into her experience and what she was feeling. And her puppet said something about, oh, but I played with the hospital bed. And she said it in such a way that, there was something wrong with that. And so then the therapist puppet was able to say, well, you know, some people might think that if you played with the hospital bed, that might cause somebody to die. But we know that's not true. We know that, you know, you didn't hurt anybody. And so they were kind of able to get at that guilt. Sometimes it's hard to get to guilt, you know, but I do think it's really pervasive and can be kind of tricky.
Yeah. And so now we're going to kind of go into more age appropriate guilt, whatever, you know, different ages process death in different ways. Well, let me admit someone. Okay. So grief by age. So we're going to start, and these are big age groups. I mean, before we go into these grief by ages, I really want to acknowledge that kids are so different, and they're at different levels, and some little kids are very verbal and some older kids are not so verbal, and that's all okay. We all exist on a spectrum. So these are real generalizations, and they may or may not apply to your kids who are this age, but this is kind of an overview of what preschool age kids might experience. So kids who are 3 to 5, or certainly younger than 3, do not understand really the permanence of death, that when a person is dead, they're not coming back, is a really just not really in their you know, their concept, because time doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? And so they're still developing a sense of this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And so when they lose someone or someone dies, it's hard for them to see the future or think about the future without that person, because the future itself is kind of a hard concept. And there's not a lot of vocabulary necessarily to express how they're feeling in this age. So a lot of the awareness of the loss is physical. So for example, there may be a lot of needing to hug and cuddle and touch and know that you as their caregiver are still there, right? Because that other person that they could touch and cuddle and hug is maybe no longer there. And they need to know that those touches are still available, right? And you may also see with this age group some what we might call like acting out, tantrums, things like this, or returning to old behaviors. Like maybe they were potty trained and then now they're not so potty trained, and that's really normal. That's really, really normal to kind of go back a little and have to kind of relearn some things, or want to kind of go back to a place where you have to kind of get it again in your body, that you're safe, that you're okay. So some things to try with this age group is to help them name their feelings. There's some really wonderful children's books and resources out there that help us. Well, the one that comes to mind right away is The Color Monster. And it's a book about this monster who's all mixed up with colors and feelings, and he sorts his feelings into little jars, and each one is a color. And for kids this age, you know, even just knowing, oh, this is what sadness feels like in my body, can be really, really helpful, so they can identify it. And then being really clear in your languaging about death, because at this age, there's a real possibility of confusion. Again, there's not really an understanding of the permanence of death. So the clearer you can be at an age-appropriate level, the better. And then, of course, I think this is true for any age group, including us, but hugging and holding whenever needed to really, I mean, in this image that Nancy chose of the bear, right, you see that need for just feeling secure and feeling safe and like, I'm not going anywhere, sweetie. I'm right here. Yeah. Anything you want to add about that, Nancy? About any of those?
No. I think you said it.
Okay. Well, we'll go on to the next one then. So next, we're going to do elementary age. Again, this is such a huge swath. Like from 6 to 11, so much happens, and there is a huge difference between a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I know that, and y'all know that. So this is really a generalization of this group. But the kids around 6 are beginning to understand the permanence of death, because they're getting that time concept, so they can kind of narratively grasp that this person is not coming back. And I think because of that, there can be some anxiety that comes in over, and some guilt, right? So this is where you're going to see more of those 3 things that we listed, right? Especially about unanswered questions, like in the beautiful story Nancy just told about the puppets, right? There was some the child wasn't clear about how death works or how someone dies. And so they fill in the gaps of the story. And that's natural. That's what kids that age are doing, right? They're telling stories. If you have someone this age, which I happen to have someone in my house this age, I mean, in my experience, it's just nonstop stories. Just story. And when there's a loss, they're using that storytelling and that narrative to try to understand and incorporate the way they're feeling into their reality. Is that a good way to, I mean, is that, yeah?
Yeah.
So, and magical thinking, you'll see a lot. So a lot of like, I'm going to bring them back with a magic spell, or I have a plan for that, or, well, so-and-so told me their dad came back, so my dad's going to come back, right? That kind of thinking, it's a very natural way that they're coping with their grief, to make up these kind of narratives and stories around it and try to understand the answers to these questions, these big questions that frankly as grown-ups we often don't fully know the answer to. So some of the things you might try with this group is making art, or having them tell stories about their grief. Expression and storytelling is just so powerful. And that's, again, Camp Braveheart is so good at this, I think, Nancy, right? So some of your kids might already be getting some of this week. You know, they might come to you with stories from their experience this week. And letting them talk. And when a kid this age has a question, which they often do, answering it as simply as you can, as simply and truthfully and clear as you can. Yeah. And if they express guilt, using that as an opportunity, like we were just talking about with the puppets, to assure them that death is not their fault. This death is not their fault. They didn't do anything wrong. as often as possible. That message really coming through very clearly and verbally can be really powerful. You know, no one caused this. This isn't our fault.
I think too, it's important to remember we don't have to have the answer. You know, I think sometimes we put so much pressure that if our kids ask us something, we need to say something. But sometimes joining them in the question or joining them in the feeling, yeah, sometimes I feel really mad too. Or sometimes I'm really confused too. Or to say, you know, I don't know, what do you think? And then you can start this conversation with them and you'll get some sense of what they may be thinking if they're willing to share. And at this age, they often are willing to.
They often are. Not always, but
Not
often.
always.
And I love that point, Nancy, that sometimes people, that it's important to let kids know really the truth or our honesty. You know, I think sometimes, especially in this age group, because of the storytelling, we want to guard them from it. And that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do. It's you know, who knows, right? But it can be really empowering and loving action, I think, to say, I'm not really sure what happens. This is what I believe. You know, this is what I think happens. And what do you believe? What have you heard? Joining them in that question. That's so, gosh, we all need that. Again, we all need this stuff. And then I also just acknowledging that this age group, because of the magical thinking and the storytelling and the way that their guilt and anxiety may come through, is that if you find playing or acting out or being silly around the grief really triggering, that's really okay. That's really understandable. And you may want to engage another trusted adult or a professional to do that work with them, because it may just be a lot for you right now, depending on where you are in your grief, to have to play funeral every day or something, right? Like you may really, that just really may not be healthy for you, and that's okay. It's okay to get help to do so they can have the space to do that. Yeah. Okay, and we'll move on to teens. So again, a huge difference between a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old. I'm gonna probably put that disclaimer at the top of everything. But, you know, Nancy, would you actually talk about teens? Because I haven't had any. My kids are still little. So will you talk a little bit about
I will. So mine are young adults, 21 and 24 now, but the teenage years are still very fresh in my mind. And I would say the teen years are full of grief for every child already, because they're changing, they're separating from their parents or caregivers, they're developing into adults, they're, you know, naturally in a healthy, they're pulling away. And there's a loss in that they may not be able to name, and we may not be able to name, but we feel it. And sometimes some of the conflict we have with teens is maybe born out of that separating, that individuating that they're doing. So when they lose a loved one, that just adds a layer of grief. And then I think back over this particular year and I think, oh my goodness, we are swimming in grief everywhere we turn. Some of the grief we can name because it's around the death of someone or the loss of something, but some of it's really ambiguous. We're not sure what that is, but it feels really uncomfortable and really hard. And it's probably grief over just all kinds of things. And so to just know that, and I think we all get a whole lot of grace right now. Like somebody I know says, pass out grace like candy. It's just there's plenty. We all need it. Our kids need it. Teens often feel othered. They feel different. They have a big fear of being judged for how they feel. And so just knowing that they're having these huge feelings and they don't know what to do with them. I've asked my kids now that they're older, like, what was going on your sophomore year? And they can't tell me even now what was going on. They didn't know what was going on then. It was just big and they were overwhelmed. And that was without, a significant loss. So you add that on. you've got some really big feelings.
Mhm.
So have I missed anything on that, Genevieve?
No,
Things to try is letting them know that it's normal to grieve. This is, I have a therapist that says there's this big pool of what's normal. There's just a few things that we really need to be worried about. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's good to model grieving for our children. We don't want our children to be, constantly comforting us or being the adult to us. But it's okay for them to see us sad, to see us weep, to say, I'm having a really hard day. I'm just going to go lay down. That's okay. You're modeling a healthy, normal response to a loss. Patience, as they may not be able to attend to their grief because there's so many other things going on with them developmentally. They may not be able to feel anything. They may just feel really numb, or they may not want to express what they're feeling. They may not have a capacity for that yet. And so encouraging them to join a peer group or seek help from a counselor. I think it's a great time for kiddos to have their own therapist, their own counselor. And again, that models for them that there is nothing ever wrong with asking for help. It's actually a good thing to be able to ask for help when you need it. Even if you just need it, a little bit of help. It's a good thing to be able to do. So a lot of what we're doing with our teens is modeling for them sort of how do you move into this life as an, more fully independent human being, but yet still being there when they're ready to talk or when they want our comfort.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to now watch a little video, but because we just kind of went through these age groups, I'm actually going to ask you right here, and I'll ask you again later to write, but to right here to share a word or a phrase as I switch over to the video about something in these slides or somewhere that you're seeing in your kiddo, something that you are seeing, something that you're like, oh, that is there, some sort of way you see them grieving right now. You can share it in the chat if you want, or you can just write a note to yourself. So. Can you see that video?
Uh-huh.
Okay, we're gonna watch this little informative video made by Refuge in Grief, which is an organization started by Megan Devine, who is a bereavement counselor and has written a book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And this is about how to help a grieving friend. But as you watch it, I want you to kind of think about these characters as either you and your kid, or who's who here.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. Kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them. Or, you know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off. Or, I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture? we're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. You want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
I love that video. I've seen it so many times, and every time I'm just, riveted by it. I think it's so helpful and so true. And we got some comments in the chat, and I invite you, if now after the video, there's a word or a phrase or a question that you want to add. Amanda says she's definitely seeing anxiety in her child, which is so common. Anita says numbness. Joel says acting out from the 10-year-old, not feeling anything from the teenager. Those are all within the circle of what's normal for those ages.
Yeah. And that awareness, I think it's so interesting how the bunny wants to we all want that, right? When we see our kids hurting, whether they're our kids or not, basically, when we see kids hurting, but we want to step in and rescue them and say, "Oh, it's okay. It'll be fine. You're okay." And that's coming from such a natural place. When really it's that, what you were saying before, Nancy, about that joining with them when possible in these moments of, "This is hard. I'm not leaving you. I'm right here." That's when there's little kids, that hugging them. It's such a physical symbol of what we're doing to our teenagers too. We're not grabbing our teenagers and hugging them, because that's not probably going to go super great in mine. But we're letting them know that we're present, right? Being available. Yeah.
And paying enough attention that when they're ready for that hug, or when they need to spill it, we're there, and it's so easy to miss. And I had someone tell, when my boys were little and her boys were grown, she said, when they're teenagers, pay attention, because those moments will come and then they'll go. And you've got to be, if it's 11:30 and you've got to use toothpicks to keep your eyes open, be there, because that moment won't come again tomorrow, might not. I have a friend that her teenage daughter lost her grandma and her grandpa, different sides of the family, in a really short period of time. And the mom really just wanted to cheer her daughter up. Her daughter was so sad. And my friend would play the guitar and sing silly songs. One time she stood on her head, and it would just infuriate the daughter. And finally, a wise therapist said, "Stop trying to cheer her up. That's not what she needs. That's not what she wants. She just wants you to bear witness her sadness. So I just get a kick out of thinking of that mom standing on her head. You know, that's how badly we want our kids to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good time to say, we will not be able to bear witness for our children if we don't have someone bearing witness for us. So it's imperative, and we're kind of lacing this through the whole thing, but it's imperative that if you are in grief and you just need someone to not fix it, but to be with you, that you take care of yourself by finding that person or by tending to your own sorrow and grief. Because otherwise, if you can't tolerate your own, or if it's too raw, it is of course going to be too raw to tolerate your child's, right? It's understandable.
Yeah.
So, and I thank you for that comment. Makes sense to just listen and let people feel. Had to learn, I can't fix it. I think that's something we all have to kind of unlearn, right? We're taught we can fix it if we just work hard and there's a way to get through this, and we'll soldier through and we can fix it. And there's some things in life
can't fix. And I think it's okay. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to learn this and then unlearn it and relearn it. And so it's really important to have a lot of compassion for ourselves. It is hard to care for children. There's no guidebook, and it's always okay to apologize and say, you know, I didn't do that well. I wish I could rewind and do that again. And I'm sorry. You know, that's okay. And it's actually good for our children to hear us say things like that.
Yeah, it's similar to the, I really don't know. I really don't know. And I shouldn't have said that. I messed that up, or I'm sorry if that hurt you. Right? It is really good for them to hear that. It normalizes that we're all human. So we're going to share with you some resources about some ideas about how you can do some things with your young people, right? Some rituals of connection. So some things that you can do in your house or easily to be in that grief together, to meet each other there. Can you see this, Nancy? Is the slide back on? Okay. So this first one is pretty powerful, in my opinion. Read age-appropriate children's books about loss or death together. And we are going to send some resources and list them as part of this. And one of those is our recommendations for some of those books. But maybe you have some. If you do, please put them in the chat. If you have a good book that you really like to read, or maybe not like, but that you do read with your kid, or you think is really powerful. And that can just be a special time. I mean, think about also if they're young, that closeness, right? Pulling them up, and you have that, you got two for one, because you got the cuddle and the share of the information. And sometimes if they're those elementary age kids, you have that magical thinking in there too. So that's a really powerful one, or can be. And then honor and talk about your loved one together as a family. Of course, everyone is going to be doing this a very different way based on your culture of origin, based on the person you lost and the stories you have to share. But there is something really comforting to kids, I think, about acknowledgement of the person. Today we're going to eat their favorite foods, or just casually talking about them, bringing in stories as you can. Oh, your grandfather really loved that. He was this way. And always reminding the child that person had love for them. I think that can really be powerful. Oh, he loved you so much, so much. He would have loved to see you do that. And that can be hard. That can be really hard to share those things. And that can take time. These are long-term goals, y'all. You don't have to do this tomorrow. You don't have to start telling happy stories tomorrow, right? It's just acknowledgement of that person, keeping them kind of in a circle, and including children when it's appropriate in acts of mourning. So Nancy, would it be helpful to talk about mourning and grieving here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so mourning grief just kind of happens to us. It's a wild beast. It has its own agenda. It does what it wants to do, no matter how old we are. But mourning is a little different because mourning is the act. It's an action. It's a verb. It's the act of inviting grief or honoring the person. So mourning is like lighting a candle, having a service, visiting the gravesite, going to counseling is actually an act of mourning. These sort of contained experiences where we invite grief to show up. That doesn't mean grief isn't going to show up whenever the heck it wants. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to show up during the act of mourning. But an act of mourning can really help us contain a little bit of especially the fear that grief is just going to pop up whenever we have a place for it. Sometimes that helps. So including kids in those things like honoring anniversaries or attending religious or cultural ceremonies and answering their questions as they come up. Yeah. Anything more about that, Nancy, that I missed?
No, I would just say I've heard through the years some beautiful ways families have done that. One family, I think the father had died, and they had a candle. Their kids were a little bit older. And whenever someone was thinking about or remembering or feeling really sad or happy about, either remembering or grieving, they would light the candle. And they didn't have to say anything about it. But everyone else would just notice the candle is lit, and we're sort of just noticing that and being maybe a little more gentle with each other today. If fire is a problem, you could use those little candles you turn on, or it could be a jar of stones. So having little spaces set aside with pictures or candles can be a really powerful way to attend to that. That also includes your children.
Yeah, I love that. And the whole family, right? It's also modeling that grief for them. You're not alone in this. You're not othered. We're all doing this together, right? That's why those cultural and religious things and those family things can be really important and powerful for kids to be a part of, to not be kept away from. And then letting kids keep objects or articles of clothes from their loved one when possible can be a really nice thing for them. If they want to cuddle up to so-and-so's shirt every night before bed, yeah, why not? That's okay. For as long as they need it, of course, right? So those kind of things, when it's possible, when that's available, can be really helpful. And then looking at photo albums, telling stories together. This is kind of about honoring and talking about them. But photo albums can be interesting for kids because they don't see printed out photos very often. It's like, oh, look, you get to tell a story about like, oh, look, this is a photograph. It's really funny. And asking the child, how do you want to honor your grandfather? Right? How do you have something you want to do? Or having them involved in the creation of those. And they may or may not know, they might be in that numbness stage or in the I'm not tired, and that's fine. But I think including them in the process empowers them to know that they can do this however they need to do it. That's really their grief. Yeah. And if you have other ideas or suggestions or things you've done in your family, please put them in the chat for people, please, please, please. Because I think these are things people are kind of always, it's hard to be creative and find something that works, right? So.
And sometimes you just stumble across something.
Oh, yeah.
And
sometimes something evolves. It changes over the years, or it comes up naturally. But these rituals of connection can be really, really important for kiddos. Yeah. Okay.
So when should we worry? Not that we don't worry a lot already. That just seems to come with parenting. And I found out about, I was looking into some images for this, and this dual colored flag at the beach, flag, I didn't know this, but probably a lot of you know this, that the flags at the beach have different meanings. And so a red flag at the beach means warning, danger, do not swim. There's no lifeguard and you better not go in. The water is not safe. A red over yellow means there's a lifeguard, but this is not good swimming conditions. This is very dangerous. So you're taking a risk. The yellow, just the yellow flag means there's a lifeguard here. It's still, the water's choppy, the undertow is strong, the riptide is strong as well. Like just, so I thought that was kind of a good image. Just like, when should we put up the red flag or notice the red flag? And so hopefully some of these are obvious, no matter if your child is grieving or not. And some of them might not be as obvious. I think the red flag ones are pretty obvious. So with any child, but especially in grief, harming oneself, harming others, damaging property, or self-medicating with drugs or alcohol. Now, harming the self, grief is this process of adaptation to a new normal. And it's very uncomfortable. It's almost like, they say when a snake sheds its skin, its new skin is really tender and they don't like to be touched. And so if you think of all of us who are grieving as having really tender skin, we're trying to adapt to this new normal. And, we're not trying to get over something. That's really not helpful when people say, you just need to get over it. So keeping in mind that healthy grieving is painful. There are a lot of different phases of grief. It looks different, and that's all within the normal range. The best barometer is to think about your child, how they were behaviorally, their personality before the death, and think of that as sort of their baseline. And where are they now? Are there some drastic changes? Are there some persistent issues that aren't moving at all? So that's sort of what we're looking at. For red flags, hurting oneself, so harming oneself, could include self-injury. It could also include having more accidents or just getting hurt a lot. That's just something to pay attention to. If a child says that he or she wants to die, that's something to pay attention to. Now, sometimes children say things like, I wish I could go be with daddy, or I want to be in heaven with mommy. That's something also to pay attention to, and maybe have someone listen with you to your child. But that may also be a very normal way of expressing that they miss mom or dad, grandma or grandpa, that they don't really want to hurt themselves. Harming others could be threatening to hurt somebody else, treating other people so poorly that they're losing friends. That's a red flag if friendships are starting to disappear all over the place. Also, an inability to care for one's own basic needs, to eat, to get dressed, to get out of bed, a sort of a new disregard for their health and appearance, or a constant sadness with no break. Typically, children are in and out a lot more than we are. We can maintain sad or mad or whatever for a long period of time. They typically can't do that. So when we see that, we just want to take note and ask for help. So some of these will even resolve on their own, but it's never, ever wrong to ask for help and get some other people that aren't in the grief to look at things with you.
Yeah, let's look at the yellow flags too.
Yeah,
That's, let me see.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you were talking about, Nancy, is that right? About that, not being able to pop in and out?
Yeah.
Is kind of a yellow flag.
It's a yellow flag. It's that persistent feeling. So not they feel guilty, they feel fear. We all do, but it's this nagging, persistent, relentless feeling of guilt, fear, and anxiety, anger. Also same with persistent physical symptoms with no apparent cause. So stomach ache every day, headache, coming home from school all the time. But there doesn't seem to be any cause for that. Academic performance, either a marked decrease, which is pretty normal when there's been a loss, but also if there's a marked increase, which, as parents, we would be like, isn't that awesome that they're doing better? But what we want to do is get underneath that and see, is there some magical thinking going on that if I'm really, really good and I make straight A's, then my other parent won't die, or my other sibling won't, we just want to get underneath that and see if there's some beliefs that need to be sort of dismantled there that are unhealthy for them. And then always, I had a therapist once say, the 3 things to look for are academic performance, social interaction, and self-esteem. If those are all strong, or 2 of 3, but if if 2 of 3 are sliding, okay, let's get some help. Let's get a tutor, a mentor, a therapist, and then keeping in mind that children and teens can change on a dime. They can adapt much more quickly than we can. So it's the feeling of being stuck that you're looking for.
Yeah. And I want to say something about that, about changing on the dime, because one of the things I notice when I work with kids who are grieving is that they will move through the emotion much quicker. So I'm used to working with adults, and I will get to something and we'll be playing or something, and that sadness will show its head, right? That like truth or that feeling, right? And in an adult, that feeling will stay for a while and we can kind of hang out there. But in a kid, it'll be there. And then all of a sudden we're back to playing again. And at first, as a therapist, I was like, well, this is a problem. They're avoiding it or they're not feeling it. But over time you realize that, no, that's their pacing, right? They're not going to just hang out in anything, really. They can barely hang out and watch a movie. You know what I mean? So of course they can't stay there in that feeling and really feel it in their body and be in that feeling. It comes and goes a little quicker than that usually, right? It's like, I like that idea of they tend to dip into these things and out, in and out. And that's how they're healing. That's a normal and natural way to do it. That's how they're doing it.
And we may even imitate them sometimes. I think sometimes they've got it, they're onto something, to move toward it and then move away from it. And, we might even dose ourselves with some of our grief.
Absolutely. They have so much to teach us.
Yeah.
And so really the basics, I think if this has been a lot of information and we're near the end here, and we really want to let you know that on a day-to-day basis, what kids need, especially kids in grief, is routines and stability. So just continuing in whatever way you can to provide that stability and structure and routine. And also, if some things in your normal routine have to slide because the grief work is taking precedence or because the person who did them is no longer there, or all different kinds of things can shift those routines. That's okay, but returning back to those routines as much as you can really create a sense of safety and stability, like a frame in which the child can feel their grief or play or be who they are, right? So that's why stability and routines is so important, because it provides this safe container for whatever mess is going on. Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know when my kids were growing up and I was working, my husband was working, and by Friday night, we were just a big argument waiting to happen. We were all so tired. And so I kind of made this playful rule that there was no talking on Friday night, that we would eat pizza and watch movies, but no talking, especially about anything serious. We would get a good night's sleep, and then the next day we could talk again. And of course, we talked on Friday night, but it sort of set this expectation that there weren't any expectations. And so, just finding what that is for your family, for you and the child that you care for.
Yeah. It can be really hard to find that again.
Yeah.
When part of your system or part of your family is not there. It can be really, really hard to find that. And I think if something does need to change in the routine or the ritual, including the child as much as they are able to make choices and it's age appropriate in how they want their night to go or how they want their day to go, it can be, you get more traction, frankly. They'll probably be more likely to participate in the routine and ritual. Yeah. And I just want to point out in the chat that there's someone shared a really cool resource. It looks like a good website for teens, and it says teenagegriefsucks.com is the website. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Okay.
So we included this slide as a reminder that grief takes time. You know, it took a long time for this beautiful canyon to form. And so the importance is small actions over time. Like Genevieve said, you don't have to do all of this tomorrow. You don't even have to remember all of this. You don't have to do any of this. You can just sort of let things emerge organically in your own family. But I invite you now to take another deep breath. Well done. You showed up and moved toward your own grief, your own pain, and that of your child's. And that is to always be honored. I think, you know, you're making a difference in the world by loving a child who is grieving. That is a great act of love. And I honor you for that. And so anytime we move toward our pain, we need to have a little recovery time built in. And so I would urge you this evening, as much as you can, to wrap yourself in comfort and love, if that looks like going outside and sitting on the porch and listening to the night for a few minutes, or taking a hot bath, or making a cup of tea, just whatever that looks like. I urge you to do that for yourself. Even if it's just a moment to breathe, or going to bed 5 minutes early. It's just important. You're worth it and you deserve it. Your children need for you to take care of yourself. And even tomorrow, if you feel a little extra vulnerable tomorrow, and you might, just take care of yourself. And we're so glad you came. Please let us know if we can support you moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And here's some of the ways we can, right? We have some beautiful programs at Hospice Austin that I'm personally very proud to be a part of sometimes. And like we have groups and counseling and really cool additional offerings like the webinars. Nancy, can you
Right.
talk a little bit?
We have a monthly webinar, and it's general topics about grief. There's actually one tonight happening at the same time as this about guilt, grief, and self-forgiveness. And then it's always the third Wednesday of every month. It's Hospice Austin website, and they're free. And I'm one of the facilitators along with Maggie Cochran, who's my colleague. So you'd be more than welcome to pop into those webinars each month, or to pick and choose the ones that sound good to you.
And we have a beautiful newsletter too,
Mm-hmm.
that you can sign up for, that will list some of our additional offerings in the webinars, right, Nancy? And Nancy usually writes a little thing on there that's really special.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that if we just have about 1 minute left, and I'm looking at the chat. Oh my goodness, more books. Thank you. So there's some more books shared here in the chat, and we will, when we share this video, we'll try to include some more books too, and some other resources and things. Yeah.
I'm gonna, there's another one by a local author. Let me get the name. Her name is Mary Dombrowski, and it's called Not the End. And it's a story she actually wrote with her 2 teenage daughters several years after her husband died suddenly. And it's just a beautiful book. It's very simple. And then she's written a couple of other versions that sort of talk about other kinds of losses. So I'll put that in the chat real quick.
So finally, just a huge old thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you for loving a kid and for, cherishing a child enough to come and want to know how to love them better, how to love them to your highest ability. So thank you. And Nancy's right. Yes, it's raw. Take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone.